Power 98.7, progressively elevating the conversation. Now we're talking.
So tomorrow, the 29th of May, 2025, marks exactly 1 year since we went to the polls for our general election to elect what is now the 7th Parliament of South Africa. That's at national level. And of course, we also had the provincial elections. And the outcome of that has gifted us a government of national unity. It emerged as a result of the two major parties, or the parties that the two largest parties, the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, coming together along with a number of other smaller parties to form a coalition government under the banner of a government of national unity. I often hear people obsess about whether it's a government of national unity or it is a coalition government. I'm not entirely sure yet what the difference is, but perhaps that would be a good point at which to start the conversation. My guests to have us have this reflection from Wits University's School of Governance, Associate Professor at Wits University's School of Governance, Professor William Gumede, joining us on the line. Professor Gumede, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me, and good evening to your listeners. I'm looking forward to speak to you.
So disappointed you couldn't join us. Were you walking the dog?
I was so disappointed. I couldn't go.
You see, I've got eyes everywhere. You have been spotted around. You've been spotted around. All right. Also joining us for this conversation is Professor Sam Koma. Good evening to you too.
Yes, good evening, Thabiso.
We've got you on Teams. That's fantastic. So I will also log on to Teams so you and I can have eye contact. Thank you to you both, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Let me, just get maybe at a very high level, get your reflections, your initial, just the reflections on 1 year of this GNU. And also, while you're at it, you can pick up on the question I was asking, whether it makes a difference one way or the other, whether we call it a government of national unity or we call it a coalition. Let's give first take on that one to you, Professor William Gumede.
No, thanks. So really, a government of national unity is when political parties come together that goes above a normal majority government. I mean, in a normal coalition, all you need to do, you just get the numbers, you just get enough political parties to give you that 50% plus to win, to be in government. Now, if you have a GNU, you can bring others in that takes you beyond that 50% plus. And then there's a second most important part of a government of national unity. You set it up, or a country set it up normally when the country is in a crisis. Now, there are many crises. Could be economic crisis like us. I mean, we've got now one of the world's highest unemployment. That is a crisis. I mean, it's an emergency where, as a country then decides, or the political formations in the country decide, well, one party on its own cannot deal with a crisis, or even a normal coalition with only a few parties on its own cannot. You need a national consensus, a bigger umbrella organization to get all of the country's energy and talent and ideas into a larger tent. And so on. I mean, it could also be some, GNUs often in the African context, people put it together after civil war, for example. I mean, we had our GNU after the apartheid, when we had to get a transition government, and so on. So, I mean, the idea really is a crisis, and a crisis can be an economic crisis. We are sitting with an economic crisis, or so on.
All right. That said, then, what have you made of year one of this animal called a GNU?
I am very positive about year one. I know I think the first year possibly has been more productive than maybe the 5 years of the ANC before as a majority party. I mean, if you just look at some of the deliveries, I mean, it's not perfect. I mean, it hasn't been perfect because, this is the first time that we have a national coalition, and we've got a culture for the last 30 years of the ANC being a majority party, and there's a majority party culture that we have had under the ANC, which means really that because the ANC was so dominant, when the ANC decides on a policy, that policy becomes a government policy because it's a majority. Now, when it goes on for 30 years, there's a culture then where people then accept the ANC's policies is the country's policies. Now, when you're in a coalition or a government of national unity, and you have, like we have, multiple parties, then the majority parties policy is not the policy of the government. Then all of the parties must come together to get a new set of policies, and I think that has been the most difficult thing for the ANC to get to grips with, but also for many ordinary South Africans, whether voters of the ANC or non-voters. I think that somehow people struggle with this the issue that the new government, the multi-party government or the government of national unity is an entirely new government. It is not an ANC majority government. Because it's an entirely new government, it needs entirely new policies. And so on. So I think that has been the difficult one. But beyond that, I think what we've gotten from the GNU, we've had a sense of hope. A country cannot get economic growth, cannot deal with poverty or with unemployment and inequality if large numbers of people are totally hopeless and have given up. That's the first thing. Second thing, what we've seen is that we've seen that in the government, everyone wants to outshine each other, which is very good because the last 30 years of the ANC majority government, people became so complacent in the ANC because, you can be re-elected and reappointed. And even if you fail, you don't have to bother because you're not going to be fired. And so on. Now what we've seen is there's a competition between the ANC and non-ANC cabinet ministers to deliver. It is good for the country, and it is very positive. So for me, a sense of hope. People are competing in cabinet to try to deliver, and then parties are holding each other accountable also. That is good. And even in the public administration, because, in the past when there was a majority-based ANC, many of our public servants, senior ones, were deployed cadres from the ANC. So they were complacent. You don't need to deliver. All you need to do if you're a senior public servant, you just need to be loyal to the party line, and then you can sit there in your corner and, enjoy your salary. Now, when you, with a GNU, you're going to be held on your toes by the non-ANC partners, and you're going to be fired, or and so on. Or at least they're going to leak the stuff, your non-performance, to the media, and so on. So I think the GNU has actually been better performing in 1 year, I think, than the ANC the last 5 years.
Very interesting take there. All right, that's Professor William Gumede from the Wits University's School of Governance. Professor Sam Kwamba is also with us. He's also an expert in governance. Let's get your take, your report card for the student called GNU.
Yes, thanks, Thabiso. I have a different take. Yes. Prof. Gumede is quite right that at the commencement of the formation of the GNU, there was optimism and a sense of hope, especially if you look at the financial market. Till this day, it remains stable, the value of the bonds and also the currency. But if one uses indicators as a basis to measure performance of the GNU, I wish to refer to economic indicators. That if you look at our economic indicators, whether we refer to the economic growth rates or unemployment rate, the numbers are quite high. We have not made a serious dent or effect in respect to fast-tracking economic growth and development as part of addressing this particular problem of unemployment. You take development indicators, poverty levels remain high, inequality levels remain high, the access to basic services in the main, access to quality and uninterrupted supply of water remains a challenge. You look at the capacity of the state, it remains weakened. The National Treasury, including the Auditor General, continue to report serious underspending on infrastructure projects. Today, the Auditor General in Parliament flagged the very same issue. You also look at the issue of accountability deficit, that since early this year to date, the President has since actioned SIU proclamations, the latest, of course, involving CETA, the State Information and Technology Agency, National Department of Public Works, the Department of Defense, a couple of municipalities. That also tells us that we still face a serious problem around accountability, regressions, and a failure of leadership to be decisive, to be bold, and also to take remedial steps in terms of actioning consequence management. And also, if you look at the latest crime stats, which covers the period between Jan to March, of course, the notable decrease is in the area of murder. But the other categories, you have an upward trend: sexual offenses, rape, robberies, and other categories. So, in broad sense, including, in fact, I also have to flag the other issue that to date, if you look at the GNU cabinet, it remains disjointed around the issue of policy development and implementation. So you have ministers who decide to amend a policy or pronounce on a policy. They go to Parliament, they account, and they get challenged. And that tells you that it appears the GNU cabinet to date has not yet perfected this issue of rules of engagement, consultation, and decision making. So that is the part going forward they'll have to begin to strengthen. How they have to cohere as a collective in terms of policy issues, but also in terms of agreeing on a number of policy priorities. But also very important, Thabiso, to date, the GNU cabinet is yet to launch an economic policy. They've not yet given us an economic policy that this is the trajectory we want to take our country in terms of addressing these myriad issues, attracting investment, and also ensuring that these other issues are dealt with, for example, the reform of state-owned enterprises and other crucial economic issues, bearing in mind that the GNU is operating in a very uncertain global economic order. You have this imposition of tariffs. You also have this massive cut by the US administration or government on a number of programs, so HIV programs, and also research and development related projects.
All the things that you have just outlined. Oh, by the way, I take it then it's a failing grade as far as you're concerned.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And an E, an F.
And an E.
Okay. All right. But I can't imagine that any of the things that you have just outlined came as a surprise to you. Within the first year of this GNU, I got a sense that that was always going to be the case, that this was going to be a year of trying to figure it out. I'm not sure whether they are any closer to figuring it out. So do any of those things that you have just outlined surprise you, or, were there aspects that perhaps you were holding out greater hope for but have been bitterly disappointed?
Yes, so the reality, Thabiso, is that 30 years into our democratic order, we have a dysfunctional state, including dysfunctional municipalities. So we have seen more pronouncements, yet little action. So if you look at this GNU, most of the ministers, they do pronounce on a whole range of interventions they intend to embark upon, but we've seen little action or not tangible improvement in the manner in which they've decided to come up with interventions or some measures as part of improving the situation. But also, you're right, the fact that needs to also be taken into account is that the GNU, when it was formed, it inherited a weak state capacity, and this mirrored accountability issues of corruption, maladministration, and all of that.
Coming back to you as well, Professor Gumede, in just picking up on what Prof. Sam is just saying now here, is that what would have been a realistic, or how do we, in a fair and realistic way, actually measure the progress of a government such as this GNU? I mean, realistically, what kind of ground could they have covered in the period that they have now been in office?
Yes, yeah. Now, so the GNU is it's a compromise. It's a middle way. So normally, the best case scenario normally is when you have had a party in power for a very long time and the party has failed to deliver, and then the best case scenario is obviously not a GNU, but is that party becomes the opposition and new parties run the country. And then when a new party is run the country, what they do, the first thing you do, you fire every senior public servant who is corrupt and incompetent. If you look what Trump has been doing, in order to sock the system. But now the GNU can't do it because the ANC is still the majority party and its cadres that didn't deliver, it's still in the public service. So so that's what when I say it's a midway. So in a way, so what's happening really? We almost have in the GNU is almost like a dual structure. Now you've got the ANC cabinet ministers and then you've got a non-ANC cabinet ministers. So the ANC cabinet ministers are slow on delivery and so on, and then you get a non-ANC cabinet minister in cabinet fast on delivery. Now the problem, sadly, is then because in the ANC itself is split between those pro-GNU and those anti-GNU, but because the ANC, when it was a majority party, it was almost a party state. Now, let me explain what a party state means. A party state is you're a majority party, then you appoint all of your public servants and your SOE and senior level as your cadres. So whatever happens in your party happens in the states because, this is now the same. Now the problem is now when a new government comes to power, the party may be out of power, but its cadres are still in power in the public service or state-owned entities, and then can block whatever reform. So that's exactly what's happening now. So you have because the ANC is split, you have those ANC cadres first in the ANC party that's opposed to the GNU, they're making life hell with the non-ANC partners in the GNU. And then you have those ANC cadres in the public service that are opposed to the GNU. They're making life very difficult also for your non-ANC ministers. So in a way, the GNU wants to deliver, but the GNU inherited the ANC's party states in the public service that hasn't delivered for 30 years. And then, unfortunately, also in that party states in the public service and in state-owned entities, you have ANC cadres who also oppose the GNU, who then also deliberately try to slow down things. But having said that, despite this inertia within the GNU, I think it is still a better prospect for South Africa, and it's also even a better prospect for the ANC to deliver. The first years of any government, and particularly a government like this, is firstly getting to terms with the new government, getting the agreements, how you're going to govern, getting over setting the rules of the game, and you can see for a whole year, sadly, the GNU have struggled to get the rules of the game because, I don't want to repeat it, but because the ANC has been setting the rules of the game for 30 years. Now, unfortunately for the ANC, because it's a multi-party GNU, it must create new rules, not ANC rules. So this conflict between ANC rules versus new rules has slowed down the GNU. I mean, we've seen it, for example, let's just be on the national health insurance policy. Now, that was an ANC policy prior to the GNU. So it was supposed to come back to the GNU, to this new government, had to re-look at it, not implement it or not adopt it. The same with the Expropriation Act. For example, there was an ANC one that was put together prior to the GNU. So now when the GNU came, that should have been taken back to the new government's, the partners for rediscussion. So that is how a GNU works. Now it's quite interesting when people, many ordinary people have been worried about coalitions. In any case, if you look at, because at local government level, often our coalitions have failed. Many coalitions have failed at local government. But, I mean, others have been successful. And one of the reasons why they failed at a local level is that often the parties with a majority votes at a local level govern as if they are the full majority party. So all of their policies then becomes the councils or the municipalities' policies. And then, obviously, then the smaller parties oppose that and reject that, and then your coalition collapses at local level. And all of this means that we're not there yet as a country to create, to get to a mature culture of coalition. A mature culture of coalition means the majority part, the party that has the most votes in a coalition, that party is not the governing party. That party is part with others, the governing parties, and that party with a majority will have to agree with the smaller parties on a new policy, not on that majority party policies. And that's a difficulty. So the great success stories around the world, whether in the Western countries or whether in developing countries, whether in African countries, the great success of coalitions, when coalitions brought economic miracles like in Germany and Switzerland or in Brazil since 1990, or in Mauritius, from the late 1970s, or even in Scandinavia and so on. So the great, coalitions, national coalitions have produced great miracles in the post-war period, but it was based on the principle that the party in a coalition that has the most votes must agree on new policies with its smaller parties. That's at the core of success of great coalitions.
That's Professor William Gumede of Wits University. Now, Professor, by the way, as Professor Sam Koma is also with us, and if you want to join our conversation, what are your reflections, your thoughts on 1 year of the Government of National Unity? What have you made of it? Is this something that you could get used to? Is this the way? Is this the future? If this is to be a reality going forward, though, how does that stack up? Does it augur well for us as a country? Let me know what your take is on 0861 987 000, WhatsApp 083 7093, on X at Thabiso Tema, or at Power FM 987. Professor Sam Koma, coming to you, just in terms of this first year of this Government of National Unity, who, in your view, has, I'm loath to use the word winners and losers, but let's go with it anyway, who have been the big winners for you or the big losers? Who has come out of the process thus far of building this Government of National Unity with some credit?
Yes, so if I will single out one minister, of course, drawn from the DA, that would be the Minister of Public Works, Dean McPherson. He's been hands-on, and also so far he has shown determination and commitment to turn around the situation in terms of dealing with the state of infrastructure. And recently, he pronounced the adoption of 2 municipalities as part of the initiative that he has launched to improve and also to turn around the situation facing these municipalities. One is Umgeni, based in KZN, and the other one, Metsimaholo, in the Free State. So he has come up with this initiative. I find the initiative to be noble, but also it has a potential to unravel the deficiencies facing municipalities, especially around the issue of infrastructure development, but also beefing up their capacity to be able to spend this infrastructure grant that gets allocated to these municipalities, but also to improve this project management capacity that needs to come into the fore. The other ministers, I see more pronouncements. Of course, they do trend on different social media accounts, but I've not seen any tangible performance improvement coming out of their portfolios to date.
You know, okay, you've actually zoomed in on the individual ministers, but from the parties that make up the GNU, who has adapted best? And you know, there was a view, and I'll tell you where I'm coming from with this one. Going into the GNU, there was a view expressed, I think, by certain commentators that actually the ANC has been the biggest winner in this GNU arrangement, because they're the one party that is fully represented in the government or in cabinet. There isn't a portfolio without an ANC cadre, or whether it be a deputy minister or a minister. That they, in fact, were the big winners. And at the same time, also, this GNU has afforded a party like the DA an opportunity to get a taste of governance, of being in government, and boy, have they grabbed it with both hands, and they're not letting go.
Yes, I agree with that view. True, the ANC is the biggest winner. Its party president remains the president of the republic, and he has assembled a cabinet with a larger pool of ministers drawn from his party, which is the ANC. The DA only secured about 6 cabinet posts, and most of the deputy ministers, of course, they're also drawn from the ANC. So on that score, the ANC is the biggest winner in terms of the structure and the composition of the cabinet. And of course, the other small, sort of relatively small parties, the IFP also has at least a number of cabinet portfolios. Most of their party members, they hold ministerial positions. You have Thabiso heading COGTA, and also you have the Minister of DPSA, Inkosi, who's also drawn from the IFP. You have Shengwa also serving as a deputy minister in the transport portfolio. So you have these small parties that have also gained, in terms of, you're right, exposure of experience of governing, but also to showcase their potential in terms of dealing with some of these pressing socioeconomic issues facing the country.
Same question to you, Professor William.
Yes, the ANC definitely got the most portfolio. So in terms of, when you say state resources, the most state resources. Now, but the problem for the ANC, this is a potential big problem electorally for the ANC, because to go all of the numbers in cabinet, but instead of using the numbers to get its best people in, get some young and fresh bloods and people in, it brought the same old people back that failed before. So, if you failed before, how are you going to now be different? If, there's some people who've been there for 2 decades, even 3 decades, and they haven't delivered, how are they going to deliver? So that is the ANC's problem, because they can and will be exposed. If in relation now to the newbies, if you look at Patriotic Alliance, or you look at a DA, although they have fewer portfolios, they are working harder and they're fresh and they're determined and they're competitive. They're hungry to show that they can deliver. So, they dominate the cabinet, although they have the fewer numbers. When I say dominate the cabinet, not in terms of dominate, in terms of talking the loudest and so on, but in terms of performance from the public point of view. And I think it's very likely the DA most probably will benefit the most electorally, although it has fewer numbers in cabinet. It will benefit in the next election more than the ANC. Now, let me tell you why. Because for the first time, many ANC voters, the black community in rural areas across the country, for the first time is seeing the DA in action, on DA members and DA leaders. And, the DA's mistake always has been in the last couple of years, it's never really fully campaigned in black areas. When I say, I mean really black areas, in the rural areas, in the far-flung areas where the voter sits, because that's where the ANC voter sits. And you have to get those voters with you, not just in the towns and so on. So the DA is almost never focused fully in a real campaign, in a deep campaign in those communities. But now those communities, without the DA even campaigning, is seeing the DA members in parliament, in cabinet. For the first time, and they're delivering, and they appear to be delivering, because the ANC made a strategic blunder. It put numbers in cabinet, but not quality in cabinet. And that's the ANC's problem. So they may be in charge now, but electorally it could hit him. I think, for example, the DA may get, if let's say the DA leaves cabinet now, kick out of cabinet now, it's very likely in the next election it will get between 5 and 10% extra votes, just because some of the, many of the black voters have never seen the DA in action, and the DA has been foreign to them. For the first time, they're familiar with the DA, and so on. And even other parties, I think the Patriotic Alliance, Gayton McKenzie, I think he has, he's been playing a very clever game. He's doing two things right. First, when I said you have to compete in the cabinet, in this big cabinet, he has good PR. He seems to be at the right places all of the time. On the one hand, and on the second hand, he's also pushing delivery. Some people may say it's a gimmick, but many people buy into it and see him. So I think he's very likely going to be gain some votes. I fear a little bit for the IFP, because the IFP is in a very tough competition. It's squeezed between the MK, Mkonte, and KwaZulu-Natal, and the ANC also. So it is under more pressure than, for example, the DA in the cabinet. I think it must be seen to deliver, and its cabinet ministers must be, in the public eye almost daily in order to outmuscle MK and also the ANC in KZN. Because if they don't get it right, they may be in the next election the biggest losers. So that really is, my own worry for them from the IFP point of view. They have to be seen to be delivering much more than even the DA or even the ANC.
So we got a glance, Professor Sam, of how I suppose the honeymoon period really ended this year with the big budget fallout. That's where we really got to see how this government of national unity will withstand the first test. I think that was the first major test. How do you believe they came out of this one, or the parties, particularly the DA and the ANC?
Yes, as we rightly put it, at the commencement of the formation of the GNU last year, we said the new game in town will be bargaining, compromise, and negotiation. And you can see that with the national budget, the Minister of Finance got it wrong from the word go, when he said in Parliament that this national budget I'm presenting to you has recorded minimal disagreements among the GNU partners. And it turned out a day later that that was not the true fact of the situation. And that's the reason now they had to go back to the drawing board and begin to appreciate. And this is what Prof. Gumete said. The ANC needs to appreciate that it is no longer a government which has majority. And it now has to learn to bargain, to also win on some and also lose on some. And that's part of the compromise. And that's the reason now the national budget 3.0 was passed without much opposition coming from especially the DA and the other GNU partners. So this is how the GNU needs to operate going forward. But we also need to begin to see political maturity among all the players across the board. And also, as I said, perfect the art of consultation and also decision making. A classic example is the Minister of Higher Education and Training, who endorsed CETA board appointments. And we know that Cabinet does approve these appointments of board members. She goes to Parliament, she gets challenged. The next day, she takes a decision to withdraw. And who challenged the minister? The DA and also in the EFF also supporting that particular view to say what was the process undertaken by you in terms of arriving at these names that we are putting forward as board appointments of the various CETAs. So that is also another lesson on the part of ANC ministers in particular, to say they need to begin to appreciate this part, to say they now have to learn to engage and also to negotiate and also compromise on some of these executive matters, but also policy issues.
So when it comes to disputes, when they do arise, I mean, we've got this thing that is described as a clearinghouse that is headed up by the deputy president. Is it possible to get this type of government or, a coalition or government of a national union or government in this form? Can it exist, Professor William, without some kind of a coalition agreement, just some kind of a document that guides the way in which the government of national unity handles its business, handles disputes? Because no doubt there will be another, episode akin to what happened with this budget. We can't, every time something like that happens, then we start, then they start reverting to their factory settings of hurling insults at each other and threatening to break up the whole thing, when we all know that's not going to happen. So there has to be some kind of a document or agreement in place, because this statement of intent doesn't seem to be worth the paper it was written on. Or am I understating it?
A coalition like this cannot work unless there is a conflict resolution mechanism. Now, there is one. Now, sadly, the one that is there is called a clearinghouse, and is run by the Deputy President, Paul Masatile. Now, just think about it, if you want to make those things effective in a multi-party type of government, you need to have a neutral person who's not either, number one, not part of the cabinet, maybe an outsider who's not part of it, or alternatively, you need to get someone from the smallest party in the government to be the chairperson of such a conflict resolution mechanism. If you have that person chairing that of the majority or party or the party with the most votes, it will never ever work. And if you just look, for example, during this budget disputes and all of the other policy disputes, I mean, that clearinghouse mechanism, the last time they met was in November last year. So it is, so firstly, the structure is wrong. You can't have a deputy president who's a member of the majority party to chair that. It has to be a minority party, the smallest party, or it has to be a non-politician to chair it, because you need to have super neutrality to do that. In all coalitions of this type, it's not just our GNU. Anywhere in the world, if you want to have effective conflict resolution, you don't get the majority party to be the chairperson. You always give the smallest party, the tiniest party, or if you can't get agreement, you get an ombudsperson. You establish a special ombudsperson from outside, and then the parties agreed that if there's a dispute, the ombudsperson is going to give the final say, and then all the parties must sign up to it. I mean, coming on that budget disputes, I think it was an important dispute because, we are a constitutional democracy, and the beauty of a constitutional democracy is if you cannot get a major party to change the political culture, then you can go to court, and the court can change the political culture. So the fact that the ANC put the budget together as if it was still the majority party and not a coalition and consult, there was almost no other way out to stop that budget, but either to take it to court or or initially to reject it, so that it is not adopted, or to take it to court. That is almost to force the ANC to learn to come to compromise, because the ANC is not used, it doesn't have a culture of compromise because it's been the majority party. So for then smaller parties, if they fail to get the ANC on board, and because we are a constitutional democracy, the parties can go to court, or the parties can use other mechanisms. I mean, we often forget, many people forget, we are not a parliamentary democracy, and we are not a presidential, we're a constitutional, which means even ANC members even if you're a member of a party, if you think your party leaders have been behaving undemocratically, you can go to court. So when people see the courts pronouncing on politics, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That shows we are a constitutional democracy, and that people have other outlets. People have the courts as an outlet to not to disrupt the process, but to ensure that the process becomes democratic and participatory.
This is a Power Perspective on Power 98.7. My guest this evening, as we look back on 1 year. Tomorrow is exactly 1 year since we went to the polls and elected this government, or various, at provincial level as well, because it wasn't just about a national government, it was a provincial government, provincial elections as well that we held. We are looking back on the year, reflecting on the government of national unity and how it has performed within the first year. My guests are Professor William Gumede of Wits University and governance expert Professor Sam Goma. Now, I want to come to the issues where, one of the things that has been a cause of great tension within the government of national unity, where Professor Sam, they were forced to have to present a united front a week ago, this time when they were in the United States, is around issues of international relations. The DA are adamant that the ANC has to change the terms of engagement there as well, that they can't act as if they are a majority government, that they are governing on their own, and that the ANC have seemingly taken the position that they have some kind of, they are entitled to guide and to lead foreign policy. Just a word on that one, because I anticipate that could also be something that could create problems within the GNU going forward. It already is creating issues.
Yes, that's the unfortunate part, that when you look at the GNU cooperation agreement statement of intent, is silent on the issue of foreign policy. And we now having a year of this GNU, until this day, the GNU has not sat down as partners to agree on what now needs to be the foreign policy of the GNU. And you're quite right. What we have now is the ANC still operating under the ambit of its foreign policy that it had since 1994 until last year, before, of course, the outcomes of the national elections. So this is what needs to be prioritized by the GNU partners going forward, to say, in as much as we seem to be agreeing on some aspects, but on these issues, which are quite fundamental, that is the issue of what then is the GNU position on foreign policy, covering a number of aspects. We're hosting the G20 presidency this year. The same, we need to get a sense in terms of what is the policy direction of the GNU in terms of addressing issues of economic cooperation with the G20 members, but also by extension, what is our position on BRICS as the GNU? We need to see that position coming out strongly on the part of the GNU partners. So this is what they need to start conversing and also having a dialogue around as GNU partners, to say, in addition to this agreement that we have, but can we then sit down and agree on some of these common issues?
Professor William Komede, as we are just looking at the time here, maybe let me get some concluding remarks from you, and then I'll come back to you as well, Professor Sam. What next for the GNU? What, when we have this conversation in a year's time, what kind of ground would you like to see having been covered? Okay, that's one on the one hand. On the one, maybe those are your hopes and your fears as well for the GNU. I don't know why I want to talk about fears. We should always present an optimistic view on these things. However, reality is what it is. What are some of the, maybe I put it there differently, some of the pitfalls that we need to be looking out for? And what is the kind of ground that we need to be able to cover within the next year to be able to say that there's progress? If you can just give me a summation, your closing remarks on that in about a minute, if you can.
Yeah. No, I think the budget, the disagreement, and then eventually the compromise on the budget has been very, very good, because it has changed the culture potentially of the GNU. Meaning from now onwards, I think the ANC will be very certain to bring in its other parties on policies, and that is hopefully it is realized that it is not a majority party. It is with other parties, and it has to change policies. So for me, there was a good thing, the outcome of that. And I also think even President Ramaphosa's meeting with Trump was also a good thing in the sense of that for the first time, the president actually took a SA Inc. group of people with him. So, he brought in John Steenhuisen from the GNU, and then he also brought in some business and sports people and so on. That is also a good sign, because the GNU can only work if it's, if you bring all of the parties together and all of South Africa's constituencies together.
Okay.
And that's, in fact, even that is the only way. We are the world's most diverse country in the world, meaning if anyone in South Africa who thinks that one color can run this country to prosperity is misguided. Anyone that thinks that one ethnic group can do that is misguided. Anyone that thinks that one political party, if it comes to power, will change this country for the good, they are misguided. Because we're the world's diverse society, we have to use the ideas of everyone and the diversity, all of our colors, all of our political strands. So I think there are great possibilities. There's been a tough learning curve for the GNU, but if they can build on the way they've dealt with some of these disputes, it could look good the next year.
The last minute for you, Professor Sam. Yes, thanks, Thabiso. Prof is quite right. I don't see the GNU collapsing because of how they pass through the hurdle of the national budget. We now have a national budget collectively agreed upon by the GNU partners, and also the recent working state visit undertaken by the president and his ministers to the White House has also in part strengthened the relationship between the ANC and the DA in the main. But what I want to see the GNU fundamentally addressing is the economic question. To say in the next 12 months, if we see some dent around these high levels of unemployment and also beginning to see some movement in terms of investments, but also the trickle-down effect, the ordinary man on the ground also benefiting from these fruits of democracy.
We need to have something to show for all this goodwill and this talk that's been expressed, is what I hear you say, Professor Professor Sam Koma. Thank you so much for your perspective, your insights. Really appreciated. And likewise to you, Professor William Gumede. I appreciate your time as well. Thank you to both you gentlemen.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good night further. There you go. Professor William Gumede, by the way, is with the Wits School of Governance, and Professor Sam Koma is also a governance expert.